10 minutes before I was supposed to walk down the aisle, my phone vibrated in my hand and changed the course of my life forever. One message. No apology that mattered. No voice to explain. Just proof that the man who swore he'd stand beside me had already chosen someone else, and that the woman they thought they had broken was about to become the last person they ever wanted watching them fall. Before I tell you how that moment became the quiet spark behind everything that followed, take a second to support this story. Subscribe and comment where you're watching from, because stories like this only reach the people who need them when you help them travel. I'm sorry, Rowan. I've made my choice. I'm leaving with her. The message stared back at me, glowing cruelly against the white silk of my wedding dress. My fingers loosened. The phone slipped from my hand and struck the marble floor of the bridal suite with a sharp crack that echoed far louder than it should have. The screen shattered. I didn't bend to pick it up. I couldn't. It felt like if I moved, whatever was holding me upright would collapse completely. Outside the door, I could hear the soft hum of voices, guests settling into their seats, laughter, the string quartet warming up, the officiant clearing his throat. Everything was still moving forward, unaware that the groom had already vanished from the story. The estate outside Willowmere Bay had been booked for over a year. A restored 19th century manor overlooking the water, all ivory stone and manicured gardens. White roses lined the aisle. Lanterns hung from old oak branches. It was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. Instead, it became the moment I learned how quiet devastation can be. My name is Elena Rowe, and until that morning I believed loyalty was something earned by loving someone long enough. I was wrong. 3 months earlier, my life had been defined by precision, discipline, and ambition. Every weekday morning, before the sun fully cleared the skyline of Ravenport, I unlocked the glass doors of Maison Loom, the city's most prestigious luxury retail house. I adjusted displays until every handbag sat at the perfect angle. I polished counters until they reflected the ceiling lights like mirrors. I wasn't obsessive, I was intentional. In a world where wealth spoke softly, details mattered. 5 years. That's how long I had worked there. 5 years of early mornings, late closings, and numbers that no one else on the floor could touch. "Number 1 again," I whispered to my reflection as I pinned my hair into a neat knot. "Let's keep it that way." At the morning briefing, the floor director cleared his throat and smiled in that practiced way managers do when they're about to make someone else uncomfortable. "Top sales consultant for the 3rd consecutive quarter, Elena Rowe." Applause followed, some genuine, some tight and forced. I nodded, grateful but restrained. Success in that space was admired, but it was also resented. I'd learned early not to celebrate too loudly. At 10:30 a.m., my assistant leaned close and murmured, "Your VIP is here." Her tone said everything. Marisol Ashcroft was impossible to miss. Old money, quiet confidence, the kind of presence that didn't demand attention but absorbed it naturally. Her family name alone could make executives stand a little straighter. "Elena," she said warmly, lifting a limited edition leather bag from the display. "This shade won't do. Everyone has it." Most associates would have apologized. I didn't. "Give me a moment," I said calmly. "Let me see what I can do." I stepped into the back office and placed a direct call to the brand's private liaison. 15 minutes later, I returned with confirmation of a custom order. Exclusive color, priority delivery. Marisol's lips curved into a satisfied smile. "I knew I could rely on you," she said. "You understand taste." That night, when I stepped outside after closing, Caleb Hart was waiting near the entrance, hands in his pockets, looking every bit like the future I thought I'd chosen. Tailored suit, easy smile, the man I'd been with for 5 years, the man who had proposed with trembling hands and promises I believed were unbreakable. As we talked, Marisol passed by. Her gaze lingered, not on me but on him. Introductions were made. When Caleb mentioned his role at Virex Advisory Group, her interest sharpened instantly. "How interesting," she said lightly. "My father's firm is reviewing proposals from Virex. Perhaps we'll speak again." She handed him her card. I told myself it meant nothing. 2 months later, Caleb proposed at a riverside restaurant bathed in candlelight. "You're my certainty," he said, sliding the ring onto my finger. "I'll always choose you." I planned our future with the same care I gave to luxury displays. Our apartment, our routines, our life. Then the distance began. Late nights, short answers, a polite coolness where warmth had once lived. A co-worker whispered one afternoon, "Be careful. That woman doesn't like losing." I laughed it off. I shouldn't have. The night before the wedding, Caleb sounded tired. "I need sleep," he said. "Tomorrow's a big day." After the call ended, I stared at the ceiling, unease tightening around my chest like a slow knot. The morning arrived anyway. Makeup brushes, champagne flutes, nervous laughter from friends trying to keep things light. But Caleb didn't answer his phone. Then his colleague arrived at the venue, pale and sweating. "He resigned yesterday," the man said quietly. "He's joining Ashcroft Holdings." The room tilted, and then the message came. A photo followed, airport lounge, champagne, matching tickets to Leneve, and a diamond ring on her hand. That was when the world stopped. My father canceled the ceremony with a steady voice that didn't match the devastation in his eyes. Guests whispered. Some pitied me. Others filmed. By nightfall, the video was everywhere. The bride left behind. Strangers dissected my collapse like entertainment. I disappeared. But disappearance, I would learn, is not the same as defeat. And the story they thought ended at the altar was only beginning to sharpen its teeth. The day after the wedding that never happened, the world did not slow down for me. It accelerated, mercilessly, hungrily, like it could smell weakness. By the time the sun rose over Ravenport, my phone had become a weapon I didn't know how to defend myself against. Notifications stacked faster than I could clear them. Messages from people I barely knew. Missed calls from relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. Strangers tagging me in videos I didn't have the courage to open. Someone had filmed me leaving the estate through the service corridor. My veil clutched in my hands. Mascara streaked down my cheeks. The video had been uploaded with a caption that felt like a slap. When money chooses better. It had already crossed 100,000 views. I lay on the couch in my apartment, still in my wedding dress, the fabric heavy and foreign against my skin. I hadn't bothered to change. It felt dishonest to take it off, like admitting the day had really happened. The bouquet lay wilted on the floor beside me, petals shedding quietly like it was grieving too. My mother called again. I let it ring. My best friend left voicemails I couldn't bring myself to listen to. Every sound felt too loud. Every silence felt dangerous. When I finally forced myself to open social media, I regretted it instantly. The comments were brutal in their creativity. She should have known her place. Men don't marry up for love. Old money always wins. Left at the altar. How embarrassing. But what cut deepest wasn't the cruelty. It was the certainty. The way strangers spoke as if my life had already been summarized, categorized, concluded. By noon, Marisol Ashcroft posted her first photo. A sunlit terrace. Champagne glasses. Caleb's hand resting possessively on her knee. The caption was simple, elegant, lethal. Finally choosing the life I deserve. I threw my phone across the room. It hit the wall and slid to the floor, face down, screen still glowing. My chest felt tight, like I'd been wrapped in wire and pulled inward. I didn't cry. That terrified me more than anything. The next week passed in fragments. I remember pulling the curtains closed and leaving them that way. I remember eating crackers straight from the box, because cooking felt impossible. I remember standing in the shower for so long the water turned cold, unable to move. I didn't go to work. When I finally did, 2 weeks later I dressed in black. Clean lines, neutral makeup, the version of myself who could still function. Walking into Maison Loom felt like walking onto a stage where everyone already knew the ending of my story. Whispers followed me through the luxury wing. That's her. The bride. Poor thing. A customer raised her phone, pretending to browse while angling the camera in my direction. Another offered condolences in a voice so syrupy it made my throat close. I lasted 3 hours. When a regular client took my hands and said, "You must be so strong," something inside me finally cracked. I excused myself, walked into the manager's office, and resigned on the spot. He tried to stop me, told me the attention would fade, that I was too valuable to lose. But I already felt lost. Leaving the building for the last time, I realized something sharp and humiliating. I wasn't leaving as the top consultant. I was leaving as a story people told. Back home, I disappeared properly. I turned my phone off, deleted my accounts, pulled away from everyone. Days blurred together until time felt theoretical, like something that existed only for other people. I asked myself the same questions over and over. What did she have that I didn't? When did he decide I wasn't enough? Was I ever enough? The answers never came. 2 weeks later, hunger forced me outside. I pulled on a hoodie, pulled the hood low, and walked to a 24-hour convenience store down the street. The fluorescent lights made my skin look gray. My eyes were sunken. I barely recognized myself. I was staring at shelves of instant noodles when a voice spoke behind me. "Excuse me, are you from Maison Loom?" My heart slammed painfully against my ribs. I turned slowly. The man standing there was in his mid-40s, impeccably dressed, with a calm presence that felt completely out of place in that narrow aisle. His expression wasn't curious or amused. It was observant. "You have the wrong person," I said quickly, lowering my head. "I don't think I do," he replied gently. "My mother was one of your clients. She used to insist on seeing only you." I swallowed. "I don't work there anymore." "That's unfortunate," he said. Then he held out a card. "I'm Nathan Cross, executive producer at Vista Live Network." I didn't take it. "My talent is wasted on instant noodles now," I said bitterly. He placed the card on the shelf anyway. Talent doesn't disappear because life knocks you down. It waits. I looked at him then, really looked. There was no pity in his eyes, no hunger for a story. "Why are you talking to me?" I asked. "Because I've watched people sell," he said, "and very few know how to make someone feel seen. You do." Before I could respond, he nodded politely and walked away. I stood there for a long time, the card burning like a dare in my pocket. For a week, I ignored it. Then, my aunt called at 3 in the morning. My mother had collapsed. The hospital smelled like antiseptic and fear. The doctor spoke calmly, but his words landed like stones. A stroke. Immediate surgery. No delay. The cost made my vision blur. I didn't have the money. The wedding had consumed my savings. Without a job, the bank wouldn't even look at me. I sat on a plastic chair in the hallway, my hands shaking, and felt something inside me give way, not into despair, but into clarity. I ran home, dug through the trash, found the card, crumpled and stained. My hands trembled as I dialed. "Nathan Cross," he answered. "It's Elena," I said hoarsely. "Is your offer still real?" There was no hesitation. "Yes, come tomorrow morning." The Vista Live studio was nothing like the luxury store. Bright lights, cameras everywhere, controlled chaos, people speaking into headsets, moving with purpose. Nathan handed me a product manual and said, "You're on in a week." A week. I nodded, even though fear coiled in my stomach. I thought of my mother, of the hospital bills, of the woman I'd been reduced to in strangers' comments. I went home and practiced until my voice was raw, memorized details, timed myself, failed repeatedly, but something was shifting. I wasn't doing this to be seen. I was doing this because I refused to disappear. And somewhere, deep beneath the humiliation and grief, a new resolve was forming, quiet, focused, relentless. They had taken my future from me once. I would not let it happen again. The first night after Nathan told me I would be on air in a week, I didn't sleep at all. I lay on my bed staring at the ceiling, replaying his words over and over, trying to understand how I had gone from a woman hiding under a hoodie in a convenience store to someone expected to speak confidently to millions of unseen faces. The distance between those two versions of me felt impossible to cross. By morning, exhaustion had dulled my fear into something sharper and more dangerous: focus. I went to the hospital before dawn. My mother lay unconscious in the ICU, machines breathing and blinking for her. I pressed my forehead to the glass and whispered promises I didn't know if I could keep. That was the moment something hardened inside me. This was no longer about humiliation or Caleb or Marisol. This was survival. Back home, I cleared my living room and turned it into a rehearsal space. I taped notes to the walls, bullet points, timings, features, benefits. My voice cracked constantly at first. I stumbled over words, lost my place, froze mid-sentence. Every failure felt like confirmation that I didn't belong in front of a camera. But quitting wasn't an option. I practiced until my throat burned. When I couldn't speak anymore, I mouthed the words silently, pacing the room, imagining someone on the other side of the lens who needed what I was saying. By the fourth day, something unexpected happened. I stopped thinking about myself. I started thinking about the viewer. That was the shift. At Maison Loom, I had learned to read people. To notice hesitation, curiosity, doubt. On television, I couldn't see faces, but I could imagine them. A tired mother, an elderly couple, someone watching alone at night, wondering whether this purchase was worth it. When I focused on them, my voice steadied. On the morning of the broadcast, I wore a fitted black blazer and neutral makeup. The woman in the mirror looked composed, but her eyes told a different story, alert, almost fierce. The studio was freezing. Bright lights flooded the set. The cameras felt like eyes, unblinking and judgmental. The product sat on the table in front of me, gleaming under the lights. A producer counted down. 5, 4, 3. The red light turned on, and my mind went blank. The silence stretched, terrifying and absolute. My mouth opened, but no sound came out. I could feel panic rising like a tide. Then I thought of my mother. "I'm nervous," I said suddenly, my voice unsteady but real. "This is my first time doing something like this." The crew stiffened. This wasn't in the script. "But I believe in this product," I continued. "I tested it myself. And right now, I wish I could be using it to cook for someone I love." The words poured out after that, unscripted and honest. I spoke the way I used to speak to clients, without exaggeration, without pressure. I admitted what the product wasn't perfect at. I explained why it still mattered. The phone started ringing. One line, then another, then all of them. The order counter climbed so fast, I thought it was broken. When the producer whispered that the product had sold out, my knees nearly buckled. I smiled through tears I hadn't planned to shed. When the broadcast ended, the studio erupted into applause. Nathan hugged me, laughing in disbelief. "You didn't sell a product," he said. "You sold trust." I rushed back to the hospital that night, my hands still shaking. I told my mother everything, even though she couldn't respond. I told her I wasn't done, that I was still here. Within hours, clips from the broadcast were everywhere. Comments flooded in, people thanking me for being honest, for being human. For the first time since the wedding, strangers weren't laughing at me. They were listening. The next week blurred into a rhythm I barely recognized. Meetings, training, rehearsals. My second show sold out even faster. Then the third, then the fourth. A nickname began circulating online, the honest host. I didn't read too much into it. I kept working. Nathan pushed me harder than anyone ever had. Voice training at dawn, camera drills, product analysis sessions that lasted hours. He never coddled me. When I made mistakes, he corrected them bluntly. "You don't need to prove anything," he told me once. "Just don't lie to them or to yourself." Slowly, my fear transformed into something like momentum. 3 months passed. My mother recovered enough to leave the hospital. When I paid the bills in full, the relief nearly brought me to my knees. Then I saw him again. I was leaving the studio one evening when I noticed a familiar silhouette across the street. Caleb stood there, thinner than I remembered, his posture uncertain. For a moment, our eyes met. I didn't stop walking. That night, Marisol posted another photo, this time from a gala. She tagged Caleb, tagged his new title at her father's company, tagged everything that screamed victory. I didn't respond, but I noticed something new in the comments. People were asking about me. A year passed. My face became familiar to millions of viewers. My segments were moved into prime time. I was no longer a replacement host. I was a draw. Nathan once said quietly, "You realize they're watching now, don't you?" I knew exactly who he meant. I told myself it didn't matter. But sometimes, late at night, I imagined them seeing me, not broken, not hidden, but thriving in a way no one could take away. The wound that had once driven me forward had changed shape. It was no longer raw. It had sharpened into resolve. I didn't want their regret. I wanted my own freedom. And that was when the real climb began. Success is loud when you first touch it, but after a while it becomes a steady hum that follows you everywhere. By the second year at Vista Live, I stopped feeling like an imposter and started feeling like someone with momentum. My schedule filled weeks in advance. Product teams requested me by name. Ratings climbed whenever my segment aired, and executives stopped pretending they didn't notice. What surprised me most wasn't the fame, it was how little it healed. I had imagined that success would erase the memory of being abandoned. That applause would drown out the sound of that single message on my wedding day. Instead, achievement sharpened my memory. Every milestone reminded me why I had started running in the first place. Nathan once said, "You're not chasing approval. You're outrunning something." He wasn't wrong. My style evolved naturally. I refused exaggerated claims. I openly stated prices, flaws, limitations. Viewers trusted that. When I presented a premium vacuum, I said plainly that it was expensive and explained why it was worth it. When I presented a budget product, I admitted it wasn't luxury but that it was honest value. The audience responded fiercely. Sales records fell one after another. I became known as the host who wouldn't lie to close a deal. Competitors mocked me at first, calling it naive. Then they tried to copy it. They couldn't, because they weren't me. One afternoon, the programming director called me into his office. He closed the door and slid a document across the desk. "We want to give you your own segment," he said. "Creative control, product selection, storytelling." I stared at the page, my pulse roaring in my ears. They called it Elena's Choice. Instead of promoting only major brands, I traveled. Small towns, quiet factories, family-owned workshops, struggling to survive. I listened to people who had poured their lives into their products and were one bad quarter away from losing everything. The first episode featured a 70-year-old woman who blended spices by hand in a warehouse that smelled like cumin and memory. Her son had died. Her daughter-in-law had left. She was raising 2 grandchildren and barely keeping the business alive. When I told her story on air, I didn't dramatize it. I didn't polish it. I just told the truth. The entire year's inventory sold out in 9 minutes. She called me afterward, crying so hard I couldn't understand her words. That was the moment I realized something fundamental. I wasn't just rebuilding myself. I was building something larger. The press took notice. Articles called it a new era in televised retail. Others were less kind. reminding readers that I was the bride who'd been left. That part still followed me like a shadow. 3 years after the wedding, I sat across from Nathan at a quiet restaurant. He swirled his drink and finally said, "I need to tell you something." He told me about his own failed engagement, about the money stolen, about the years he spent broken and angry. "I thought success would fix it," he said softly. "It doesn't. It just gives you a bigger mirror." I understood him completely. 5 years after the altar, I stepped into a new office. Glass walls, city skyline, my name etched discreetly on the door. I wasn't a host anymore. I was the founder of Row Collective. We launched with a single line of skincare. Clean, practical, unapologetically honest. The slogan went viral overnight. Even if they leave you, don't abandon yourself. Investors lined up. Funding poured in. We expanded into home goods, fashion, wellness. Each product carried the same philosophy, clarity over illusion. Revenue crossed 8 figures in the first year. Awards followed. Panels. Interviews. Photos of me, smiling confidently beneath headlines about resilience and reinvention. On the outside, I was everything they admired. On the inside, something still felt unfinished. Then the attacks began. At first, they were subtle. Anonymous comments questioning my credibility. Old rumors resurfacing. Twisted, exaggerated, manufactured. Then manipulated photos appeared online, suggesting things I'd never done. A coordinated smear campaign. Sales dipped. Partners hesitated. A senior executive resigned without explanation. Suppliers quietly backed away. I recognized the pattern immediately. Power doesn't forgive humiliation. I knew who was behind it before the confirmation arrived. My legal team uncovered connections leading back to Ashcroft Holdings. Marisol's father. She had watched me rise for years. Now, she wanted me erased. The pressure mounted quickly. Retailers pulled contracts. Media tone shifted overnight. Executives who once praised me suddenly needed space. Nathan was forced out of VistaLive for conflict of interest. Weeks later, stress sent him to the hospital with a stroke. That broke me. I sat alone in my office one night, lights off, notifications stacking on my phone like accusations. I had built everything on my own, and it was all being dismantled with surgical precision. The board demanded answers I didn't have. Investors whispered about exit strategies. A buyout offer arrived, insultingly low, with a clause banning me from the industry. It was annihilation disguised as negotiation. I went to see my mother. She listened quietly, then took my hands. "You've proven everything already," she said. "You don't need to keep fighting for a past that hurt you." I wanted to stop. I was exhausted. But when I returned to the office the next morning, something unexpected waited for me in the lobby. People. Dozens of them. The small business owners I had featured. The ones whose lives had changed. They stood there with determined faces, holding documents, letters, proof. "You helped us," one of them said. "Now we help you." They had pooled resources, retained legal counsel, prepared statements, evidence. I felt my knees weaken. For the first time, I understood the true weight of what I had built. Not vengeance. Community. And I realized then, the story wasn't over. It was about to turn. For the first time since the attacks began, I didn't feel alone. The people standing in my lobby that morning weren't investors chasing returns, or executives protecting reputations. They were shop owners, factory managers, artisans, and entrepreneurs, people whose names would never trend, but whose livelihoods were stitched into every product they made. I recognized every face. They had come without cameras, without announcements, just resolve. One by one, they told me what they had prepared while I was busy bracing for collapse. Legal briefs documenting false claims. Screenshots of coordinated troll accounts traced back to marketing firms tied to Ashcroft Holdings. Emails from suppliers pressured to break contracts. Quiet threats disguised as business advice. It wasn't speculation. It was evidence. The attorney they brought with them spoke calmly, methodically. Defamation, market manipulation, unfair competition, conspiracy. He explained the process, the risks, the time it would take. He didn't promise an easy victory. He promised a real one. That afternoon, we held an emergency meeting with the remaining employees. I told them the truth, everything. No spin. No reassurance I couldn't back up. I expected fear. I expected resignations. Instead, people stood up and said they were staying. Someone clapped. Then another. I realized then that whatever happened next, this company was no longer just mine. The next 48 hours moved fast. Press releases were drafted, not by my team, but by the coalition of businesses who had come to my defense. They went public first before I did. They told their stories, how Elena's choice had saved their companies, how the rumors were lies. Public opinion shifted almost overnight. Then came the lawsuit. When the filing hit the news, the tone changed everywhere. Suddenly, reporters who had avoided my calls wanted interviews. Analysts started asking questions about Ashcroft Holdings' past behavior. Old cases resurfaced. Patterns emerged. 2 days later, federal investigators showed up at Ashcroft headquarters with warrants. I didn't celebrate. I sat quietly in my office and watched the news feed in silence. Marisol's arrest came later that evening. The image of her being led into a courthouse, head high, jaw clenched, was replayed on every channel. The comments this time weren't cruel. They were cold. By the end of the week, Ashcroft Holdings stock was in freefall. The board withdrew the buyout offer. The clause banning me from the industry vanished. Nathan woke up. When I visited him in the hospital, he smiled weakly and said, "You didn't beat them. You outgrew them." He was right. The company stabilized. Slowly, carefully. Employees returned. Suppliers apologized and renewed contracts. We didn't rebound overnight, but we survived. Months later, the court ruled in our favor. The damages didn't matter to me. The record did. Ashcroft Holdings was dismantled piece by piece. Marisol disappeared from public view. Her father resigned in disgrace. One afternoon, as I was leaving a conference, a valet opened my car door. I recognized him instantly. Caleb. Time had not been kind to him. His posture was smaller, his voice uncertain when he said my name. I thanked him politely and got into the car. As we pulled away, I felt nothing. Not anger. Not satisfaction. Closure. That night, standing in my apartment, overlooking the city, I realized something profound. I had spent years thinking this was about proving them wrong. It wasn't. It was about proving myself whole again. And for the first time in a decade, I slept without dreaming of the altar. After the court ruling, the world expected me to celebrate. They wanted statements, smiles, victory speeches framed as inspiration. Reporters camped outside the building again, just like they had years earlier. But this time they were waiting for the woman who had won. I gave them nothing, because winning didn't feel the way I thought it would. The truth was quieter, heavier, like standing on a battlefield after the noise has faded, realizing how much ground was scorched just to reach this moment. I had my company back, my reputation restored, the truth on record, but there was a strange emptiness where triumph was supposed to be. For the first time in years, I wasn't running. That scared me. Without the pressure of survival, I didn't know who I was supposed to become next. The weeks that followed were filled with rebuilding. Not the dramatic kind, but the slow, tedious work no headlines mention. Renegotiating contracts, rehiring teams, restoring trust. Some people came back apologetic, others embarrassed. I accepted both. Pride had no place left in me. Every morning, I arrived early and walked the office floors alone, listening to the quiet hum of computers warming up, the smell of coffee drifting in from the break room. It reminded me of my early days at Maison Loom, before ambition had been tangled with pain. One afternoon, I found an envelope on my desk. No return address, just my name handwritten. Inside was a letter from a woman in Hollow Creek, a town I'd never visited. She wrote about losing her husband, about watching my show late at night when the house felt too empty, about starting a small soap business after seeing me feature other women like her. She ended the letter with a single sentence that made my chest ache. "You didn't just sell me a product. You made me believe I could still begin." I sat there for a long time, holding the letter in both hands. That was when it finally hit me. This wasn't about Caleb. It wasn't about Marisol. It never really had been. They were just the spark. What I had built, the platform, the company, the community had outgrown the wound that created it. And clinging to that old pain was beginning to feel like disrespecting everything that had grown beyond it. A month later, I made a decision that shocked my board. I stepped away from daily operations. Not because I was tired, but because I wanted to see who I was without constant control. I appointed a leadership team I trusted, people who had stayed when it would have been easier to leave. I shifted my role to strategy and mentorship. Instead of managing numbers, I started listening again. I traveled quietly this time. No cameras, no announcements. I visited factories I'd helped save, kitchens where products were still made by hand, homes where my letters were framed on walls I never expected to matter. In Stonefield Ridge, a former textile town barely hanging on, a group of women showed me a community workshop they'd opened using funds raised after my show. They hugged me like family. One of them said, "You gave us permission to believe we weren't invisible." I had to excuse myself to cry. At night, alone in hotel rooms, I finally let myself feel everything I'd been postponing. The betrayal, the humiliation, the rage I'd pretended was motivation. The years I'd lived with my jaw clenched so tight I'd forgotten how to relax. Healing was not gentle. It came in waves that left me breathless. One evening, back in Ravenport, I found myself walking past the old estate in Willowmere Bay. The gates were closed, the gardens trimmed. Another wedding was taking place inside, laughter drifting faintly through the night air. I stopped across the street. For a moment, my chest tightened the way it used to. Then it loosened. I smiled, not bitterly, not sadly, but with relief. That place no longer held me. A week later, my assistant told me someone had requested a meeting. A personal one. No agenda. Just a name. Caleb Hart. I stared at the screen for a long time before responding. "Schedule it," I finally said. He arrived looking older than his years. Not broken, just worn. The kind of wear that comes from realizing too late that shortcuts cost more than long roads. "I don't want anything," he said quickly, as if afraid I'd leave. I just needed to say something out loud. I let him speak. He told me about being discarded when he stopped being useful, about how admiration had felt like love until it vanished, about the silence that followed. "I thought I chose the better world," he said quietly, "but I lost myself in it." I listened without interruption. When he finished, I said only one thing. "I hope you find peace." He waited, for forgiveness maybe, for anger, for something dramatic. There was nothing left to give. After he left, I closed my office door and sat in silence. I felt lighter, as if a long, unspoken sentence had finally ended. That night, I stood on my balcony overlooking the city lights and understood something with startling clarity. Letting go wasn't losing. It was reclaiming. I no longer needed the past to justify my future. I didn't need their regret to validate my worth. I didn't need to keep winning a war that had already ended. The woman who had collapsed in a wedding dress was gone. The woman who had rebuilt herself through sheer will had evolved. What remained was something quieter and far stronger. Purpose. And with it came a new question. Not how far can I go, but how much good can I leave behind? Once I stopped running from the past, time began to behave differently. Days felt fuller, not heavier. Mornings no longer arrived with a list of battles to fight. Instead, they came with quiet decisions: where to go, who to listen to, what truly deserved my energy. I hadn't realized how long my life had been driven by reaction until I finally stepped into intention. The foundation we launched that year wasn't planned as a grand gesture. It started with a conversation between me and 3 women who had once stood in my lobby holding documents and hope. We wanted something simple, sustainable, something that didn't revolve around my name or story, but around access. We called it the Second Door Initiative. The idea was straightforward. Small businesses didn't fail because of lack of talent. They failed because the doors to capital, distribution, and visibility were locked. We wouldn't give charity. We would give leverage. Within 6 months, we funded 47 ventures. By the end of the year, it was over 200. I visited as many as I could in person. In Red Fall Crossing, a former auto town that had been hollowed out and forgotten, I met a man who had converted an abandoned warehouse into a solar assembly hub. He shook my hand like he didn't quite believe I was real. "They told me to stop trying," he said. "But you didn't." In Lakewood Vale, a single mother ran a textile studio employing women who had survived domestic abuse. She showed me pay stubs like they were medals. "This is the first time I've ever paid myself without guilt," she said, crying. I stopped being surprised by tears, mine or anyone else's. The more lives I touched, the more I realized how narrowly I had once defined success. Revenue, growth, headlines. I had chased those numbers because they were measurable, because they could drown out doubt. But impact? Impact was quieter and infinitely louder at the same time. One evening, after a long day of meetings, I returned to my apartment and found a package waiting outside my door. No sender listed. Inside was a photo. It was from the wedding day. Not the viral moment. Not the collapse. This one was different. It showed me standing alone in the garden before the ceremony. Sunlight filtering through the trees. My veil lifting slightly in the breeze. I looked peaceful, unaware, whole. On the back, in unfamiliar handwriting, was a single sentence. She didn't know it yet, but this was the last day she would live for someone else. I sat on the floor and cried until my chest hurt. That night, I dreamed, not of the altar, not of betrayal, but of open doors, endless hallways, and light pouring in from places I'd never thought to look. A year later, Row Collective went public. I hadn't planned on being there for the opening bell. I almost didn't go, but Nathan insisted. "You don't get to build something this big and hide," he said, smiling. The trading floor buzzed with energy. Cameras flashed. Voices overlapped. When my name appeared on the massive screen above us, the applause was thunderous. As the bell rang, I felt no rush, just gratitude. In interviews afterward, reporters asked the same question in different forms. "How does it feel to finally win?" I answered honestly. "I didn't win," I said. "I arrived." That answer confused some people. It went viral anyway. A few weeks later, I attended a private event hosted by a group of women founders. No press, no speeches, just conversation and shared stories. We sat barefoot on cushions, glasses of wine forgotten as we talked about fear, loneliness, and the strange isolation that can follow success. One woman said, quietly, "No one warns you how lonely the top can feel." I nodded. Another added, "Or how hard it is to stop proving yourself." That night, I realized something subtle but important. I had forgiven Caleb long ago, not consciously but completely. His role in my life had shrunk until it no longer had power. Marisol, too, had become a distant memory, stripped of myth and menace. They were chapters, not the story. Still, the past has a way of resurfacing when you least expect it. It happened on a rainy Thursday afternoon. I was walking into a bookstore near Harbor Point, one of my favorite quiet places, when I heard my name spoken softly behind me. "Elena." I turned. It was Marisol. She looked different, thinner, less polished. Her hair pulled back without ceremony, her coat wrinkled from use, rather than style. For a moment, we simply stared at each other. Two women bound by a history neither of us could undo. "I didn't know if you'd want to see me," she said. "I don't know what I want yet," I replied honestly. She nodded. "That's fair." We sat at a small table near the window. Rain streaked the glass. Outside, the world continued, indifferent to the weight between us. "I won't excuse anything," she began. "I was cruel. I thought power meant never having to look back." She swallowed hard. "And now I spend a lot of time looking back." I listened, not because she deserved it, but because I did. She spoke about losing everything she believed was permanent, about the silence that followed scandal, about how emptiness doesn't discriminate. "I don't want forgiveness," she said. "I just needed you to know I see you now." I studied her face. There was no manipulation there, just regret. "I hope you find peace," I said, echoing the words I had once offered Caleb. She smiled faintly. "You already have." When she left, I didn't feel shaken. I felt finished. That evening, I walked along the harbor as the rain eased into mist. The city lights reflected on the water like 1,000 small possibilities. For the first time, my story didn't feel defined by what had been taken from me. It felt defined by what I had chosen to give. I went home and wrote a letter to myself. Not the woman I was at the altar. Not the woman who built an empire out of pain. But the woman I was becoming. I promised her rest. Joy without justification. Love that didn't need proof. A life measured not by how far I rose, but by how deeply I lived. The next chapter wasn't waiting to be written. It was already happening. The strange thing about closure is that it doesn't arrive with fireworks. It arrives quietly, almost politely, like a guest who doesn't want to disturb the room. I didn't wake up one morning feeling triumphant or vindicated. I woke up feeling free. The calendar on my wall told me it had been 10 years since the wedding that never happened. 10 years since I stood in white silk, clutching a shattered phone, convinced my life had ended before it truly began. That realization sat with me for a long time as I watched the city wake outside my window. Traffic humming, lights flickering on in distant apartments. Somewhere below, a couple laughed as they hurried down the street, late for something that mattered to them. Life had gone on, and so had I. That morning I didn't rush. I made coffee slowly. I stood barefoot on the balcony and let the cold air sting my skin. There was no meeting waiting to swallow my day, no emergency demanding my attention. For the first time in years, my schedule was mine. I drove myself to the row, collective offices, without an escort, without a driver. Just me and the quiet hum of the engine. The building gleamed in the morning light, glass reflecting the sky like a promise kept. Inside, the lobby was alive. Employees laughed. Someone argued cheerfully over a presentation. A new hire looked around with the same nervous excitement I once had at Maison Loom years and lives ago. As I walked through the space, people greeted me not with awe or fear, but with familiarity. That mattered more than any headline ever had. In my office, I found a small framed photograph waiting on my desk. I recognized it immediately. The old valet at the stock exchange, Marcus, once Caleb, once the center of my world, had somehow obtained it and sent it anonymously. It showed the city skyline at dusk, lights just beginning to glow. On the back was a note, written in uneven handwriting. "Thank you for showing me that endings don't always destroy us. Sometimes they redirect us." I didn't feel anger. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt peace. I placed the photo in a drawer and closed it gently, as if sealing a chapter that no longer needed to be reread. That afternoon, I attended a small ceremony I hadn't told the press about. No cameras, no speeches, just people. The Second Door Initiative was opening its 100th funded workspace, an innovation hub run entirely by women who had once been told they were too late, too old, or too unrealistic. They handed me a pair of scissors to cut the ribbon. I hesitated, then laughed softly. I've cut enough things apart in my life, I said. This one feels better. The ribbon fell. Applause filled the space, warm and real. One of the women took my hands afterward. She was young, nervous, eyes bright with fear and hope tangled together. Can I ask you something? She said. Of course. Did it stop hurting? What they did to you? I thought carefully before answering. No, I said honestly, but it stopped controlling me. She nodded, like that was the answer she needed. That evening, back at home, I stood in front of the mirror longer than usual. The woman looking back at me wasn't flawless. She carried lines earned through stress and laughter both. Her eyes held depth instead of longing. For years, I had been defined by reaction, by betrayal, by ambition forged in pain, by the need to prove that I had not been discarded. Now, for the first time, I felt defined by choice. I chose who stayed in my life. I chose how success looked. I chose rest. I chose meaning over spectacle. The past no longer whispered in my ear. It had finally gone quiet. Later that night, as the city settled into its familiar rhythm, I opened my laptop and watched the old video, the one that once destroyed me. The bride leaving through the back corridor, head bowed, dress dragging across stone. I didn't flinch. I watched her the way you watch someone you once knew well, someone brave but unaware of how strong she would become. I wish I could tell you, I whispered to the screen, that this isn't the end. But maybe it was better that she didn't know, because she stood up anyway. I closed the laptop and turned off the lights. As I lay in bed, I realized something profound. If he hadn't left, if she hadn't taken what wasn't hers, if that humiliation hadn't shattered me in front of the world, I might have lived a smaller life, a safer one, but never a fuller one. Sometimes the worst moment of your life is only terrible because you don't yet see the road it forces you onto. Mine led here, not to vengeance, not to domination, but to growth, dignity, and a purpose that outgrew every wound that created it. I fell asleep smiling, not because I had one, but because I was no longer fighting. And that, I finally understood, was real freedom. If this story stayed with you, do me a small favor before you go. Subscribe to the channel and tell me in the comments where you're watching from. Your support helps these stories reach people who need them more than they realize. Thank you for staying until the end.